Something happened. Nothing dramatic, just an ordinary day. A physician who'd seen 45 patients, who had eaten on the go, who had loved the work for years, met someone at the end of the day and began to cry. She couldn't explain it. Nothing had gone wrong, but something had. The weight of it had been accumulating in ways that she had no language for. That moment, the ordinary day that breaks something, is what this video is about. Not burnout as a clinical label, not resilience as a demand, but what's happening inside the bodies of health workers, inside a system that has asked too much for too long. They believe that the problem is them, that they need to be stronger, more boundaried, more self-aware. Nothing is wrong with them. It's the system that's failing, not the people working inside it. I'm not here to give another checklist. I'm here to provide a map. But first, a question. Research shows that social relationships influence the risk of death as much as smoking and alcohol. Why should that statistic matter to health workers? Because the workplace is itself a social environment. Professional relationships, bounded by roles and responsibilities, are still relationships. The ward and the clinic are still human systems, and the clinical encounter is still a meeting between nervous systems. And yet, over time, something has been lost, not by design, not by intention, but as a gradual consequence of industrialization, of the logic of throughput, standardization, and efficiency applied to environments that are fundamentally human. Along the way, a confusion took hold that to be professional meant to be impersonal, that privacy required the suppression of the personal. But these are not the same thing. You can be personal and professional. You can maintain appropriate boundaries without abandoning the human being inside the role. What industrialization and other factors quietly removed were the micro moments of connections that the nervous system depends on to feel safe. These are not incidental. They are neurophysiological events. A brief exchange at the end of a handover, the pause before entering a room, the glance between colleagues that says, "I see what you're carrying." Each of these is a small reset, a signal to the nervous system that says, "You're not alone here," that it's safe enough to stay present, that connection is still possible inside this environment. One of the most influential frameworks in current neuroscience describes this as co-regulation, polyvagal theory, the way nervous systems stabilize one another through tone, timing, presence, and proximity. It doesn't require depth or disclosure. It requires only a moment of genuine recognition. When these moments are systematically absent, through speed, through work overload, through relentless throughput, the nervous system does not simply feel unsupported. It shifts into a state of chronic low-level threat detection. Not a personal failing, a predictable physiological response to an environment that has stopped sending safety signals. That's not a soft skill problem. It's a clinical infrastructure problem. And it's felt quietly and cumulatively in the body of every health worker who has ever stood at the end of a shift wondering why they feel so alone. Here is the first truth. The relational field is already active. In every handover, every ward round, every bedside conversation, every clinical meeting, nervous systems are meeting before a single word is spoken. When the system outside the body is incoherent, The body reads it as a threat. Strain is misread as rudeness, urgency as aggression, withdrawal as indifference. And none of it is visible until you have a way to see it. When the invisible becomes visible, something changes. Choice returns. Not control, not perfection, choice. The ability to respond rather than to react. To understand the map, we have to begin with what it moves between. Not two techniques, not two skills to develop, two aspects of who you already are. At its center sits awareness, not self-monitoring, not watching your signals, not another task for an already exhausted mind. In the world's oldest contemplative traditions, there's a teaching. The mind is the surface of the ocean, the heart is the ocean itself. The mind is not the problem. It's your primary instrument of survival, the very reason you stay alive, the reason you can read danger and respond to crisis, make 10 decisions in 60 seconds. It's also when survival is not the demand, your instrument of discernment and analysis. It's essential. Both functions are essential. But the surface is not the whole ocean. Beneath it, steady, vast, untouched by the waves above, is the heart. Not the anatomical heart. The heart is the ocean itself, the depth that holds the surface without being disturbed by it. The source of connection, coherence, restoration, and direction. This is awareness. It's not something you construct, not something to achieve. It's the place you return to when you're still enough for the surface to settle. The observer of everything you experience, present before the ward noise begins, present after it ends, available in the middle of it when you remember where to look. In your training, you were taught to stay on the surface, to perform clinical competence without letting the ocean show. What was removed was not your capacity for this depth. The conditions under which returning to it was possible was removed. These micro moments of stillness, the pause before entering a room, the breath that descends rather than braces. Awareness is the practice of returning, not away from the clinical encounter, but into the depth that makes it survivable, and more than survivable, genuinely human. At the outer edge sits expression. When the mind alone is running the room, untethered from the heart, operating from the surface without depth, expression becomes reactive. The clinical mask, the performance of competence, the braced silence that says, I'm managing this, even when the body is saying otherwise. But when heart and mind are in right relationship, when survival is no longer the only demand, when discernment and connection arise from the same coherent source, expression is no longer managed. It emanates. Your clinical skill and your compassion finally arrive from the same place, not performed, not maintained at cost, effortlessly alive. This is what the nervous systems around you are reading before you speak, not your words, not your technique, whether the ocean is present behind your eyes. And between these two poles, between awareness and expression, lie 6 movements, 6 ways the relationship between mind and heart shows up or breaks down in the living reality of a clinical shift, already happening, already shaping every outcome, now becoming visible. Before we go through the 6 movements, I need to say something about what we're aiming for. The goal is coherence. And coherence is not the same as being calm. Calm implies the threat is gone, the crisis is over, everything is fine. In a hospital ward, in an emergency department, in an outpatient clinic, in a primary care centre, in a long-term care facility. How often is that true? The challenge is always present. The person in front of you is always real, and the system behind you is always asking for more. Coherence assumes all of that is still right there. It's your capacity to remain grounded in the depth while the pressure is still present. That's a much more honest goal and a much more useful one. A note before we continue. The map is designed for practitioners who are carrying a great deal but are still standing. It's a practice for the depleted and the over-resilient. It's not a crisis intervention. If what you're experiencing goes beyond depletion, please reach out to your workplace support, your professional association, or any program that is nearby. That's the first right step. For everyone else, this is for you. Coherence is not built. It's what remains when the surface settles enough for the depth to show. So when we talk about islands of coherence, we're not talking about escaping the clinical environment. We're talking about finding ground inside it. Brief moments of internal organization that lets you access your skills, your presence, your ethics, even when the wider system outside of you remains incoherent. Before we name the 6 movements, I want to say something about what's actually happening in these exchanges at the level of the body. Your nervous system isn't waiting for you to think. It's scanning the room before a conscious thought has formed, reading prosody, which is the rise and fall of a voice, reading facial tone, the tension in a jaw, the openness around the eyes, reading proximity, whether the distance between you feels safe or threatening. And it's organizing a response. Before words, before intention, before you decide anything. This is neuroception, the body's continuous subconscious assessment of whether the environment is safe. It happens in fractions of a second, which means that what you bring into a clinical encounter, your pace, your tone, your physical state, is being read by the nervous systems around you before you've said a word. And the 6 movements work exactly at this level, not on the surface, in the depth where the body is already listening. The stories you're about to hear come from health system change makers across low, middle and high-income countries who documented their experience on film. Each one is real, each one is theirs. Details of the WHO Changemakers film is in the description below. And before we go further, a word about who this is for. You're not watching this as an isolated individual. Watch it as a practitioner, embedded in a team, in a department, and in a system. The map we're about to explore operates at all of those scales. It shapes what a team can hold. It changes what a system can sustain. But it begins here, with you, in your body, in the clinical encounter, because you cannot offer to others what you have not yet found in yourself. That is where we start. A physician reached a breaking point on a completely ordinary day. Nothing had gone wrong, no crisis, no confrontation. The weight of it had been accumulating in ways she had no language for, until the body finally spoke for itself. This is what happens when noticing is absent. Your body reacts before you think. Before you decide how to respond, your nervous system has already organized a response based on what it's sensing in the clinical environment. Physiological changes, heart rate, muscle tone are all underway, before meaning is cognitively processed. Noticing asks one question: what state am I in right now? Am I mobilized? That's activated, braced, urgent? Am I withdrawn, numb, flat, distant? Or am I present, grounded enough to stay in relationship? Just naming it, the observer briefly sees itself. That alone interrupts the automatic response. It creates a break, a suspension of the ingrained professional habits that survival mode reaches for automatically. The reflex to assert authority, the reflex to withdraw into clinical distance, the reflex to push through rather than pause. It opens a window, a fraction of a second, in which a different physiological trajectory becomes possible. And in that space, choice begins. In a neonatal unit, staff were overwhelmed and under-resourced. A doctor had an idea. The mothers were waiting outside. What if they came in? The nurses were skeptical, but the mothers were trained and they came, and something shifted. Not because of a protocol, because of a mother's regulated presence. Her physical contact, her attention, her calm were acting as powerful medication, and the babies grew stronger. A mother's body steadily present, anchoring another nervous system. This is anchoring. You can't stabilize others if you're being swept away by the current in the room. Anchoring is not about calming down after the fact. It's about finding steadiness in the middle of it. When you orientate your attention to something steady, your heartbeat, your breath, the weight of your feet, your nervous system begins to shift. The nervous system shifts from defensive readiness towards social engagement. Your heartbeat has been beating this whole time. Your breath is moving without effort. You don't create steadiness. You find it where it already exists. And the moment you find it, your capacity to remain in clinical relationship comes back online. In a different ward entirely, the baby survived. That's how the story ends. But during the resuscitation, the junior doctor and a senior nurse had entered into a collision, both experienced, both trying to help. The pace of the exchange had accelerated beyond what either could hold. The doctor raised his voice. The nurse was sent out, not because either was wrong, but because the tempo had made thinking impossible. Urgency communicates threat. Space communicates capacity. This is physiological, not just perceptual. When the pace of a clinical interaction accelerates, rushed words, compressed silences, cortisol rises, attention narrows, the room contracts around threat detection. When you slow, even slightly, the collective rhythm shifts. The surface begins to settle, and what was underneath becomes available. Heart rate variability begins to recover, perception widens, and clinical judgment returns. Pacing is not about slowing the clinical work. It's about being intentional in the interaction, in the way you speak, in the way you move through your environment. That intentionality creates space for what you're communicating to be actually received. You may be thinking, I can't slow down. The situation doesn't allow it, or my work doesn't allow it. If I slow down, something gets missed. That thought is not resistance. It's your nervous system telling you exactly what the system has cost you. Hold it, because what comes next is about what happens before you speak at all. There's a specific kind of silence in a clinical environment where it's not safe to be wrong. It's a braced silence. That's what existed in a unit where staff had learned over time that naming errors was dangerous, not because they were dishonest, because the body had learned to signal compliance, to present competence and certainty, even when neither was fully present. The gap between what staff felt and what they showed had become the norm, and patient safety eroded invisibly over time. Others read your facial tension and posture before they hear your words, not figuratively, literally. The nervous system reads these signals, prosody, facial tone, eye contact, posture. It registers them faster than cognition. By the time your words arrive, the room has already decided how to receive them. A softened jaw, open posture, a tone that does not carry concealed alarm. These cues can shift another person's autonomic state within seconds, not through effort or technique, but through biological transmission. The body transmits what is at the source, and the source is always intention. Heart brings connection, compassion, purpose. Mind brings judgment, analysis, clarity. Both are needed in different measures depending on what the moment requires. Being professional is knowing the right mix and letting the body signal it honestly. Signaling is the practice of noticing what your body is already communicating. The jaw that clenches, shoulders that brace in a meeting. When you notice the signal, you can soften it. And that changes what others receive from you before you've said a word. The recovery outcomes were remarkable. That was a finding. What had changed was not the clinical protocol, it was the conditions of arrival. In an inpatient psychiatric unit, patients had previously been referred to by diagnosis, not by name, by condition. On arrival, they were questioned, searched, medicated, and led to a sterile room. One practitioner changed the approach. People were welcomed with tea. Rooms were made comfortable. Former patients became support staff. The person was met before the condition was addressed. Before you address the clinical content, you must meet the other person's biological state. One person's regulation can stabilize another. One person's dysregulation can unsettle a room. This is co-regulation, and it's measurable. Heart rate variability synchrony has been documented in genuine clinical encounters. Oxytocin rises in moments of real recognition. Bridging asks, what state is this person in? Are they agitated? That agitation is a survival response protecting them. They need steadiness. Are they withdrawn? They need safety. Meet their state first, then address the clinical content. You're not fixing their state. You're offering your depth as a place their nervous system can find its own ground. Your settled nervous system gives their nervous system permission to settle. A young woman needed care, mental health, addiction, complex history. The mental health unit referred her on. The addiction unit turned her away. Each agency was waiting for the other. Nobody named what was happening, so the structure held. When one clinician finally brought the agencies together and named it, not as anyone's fault, but as a structural failure, a process of co-creation became possible. A common policy, shared training, trust. Unspoken pressure drives behavior invisibly. When tension, urgency, or fear remains unnamed, it leaks into every clinical interaction, and no one knows how to work with it. Naming operates at 3 levels. The first is personal. What is my body sensing right now? Am I noticing urgency in myself? Has something within me contracted? The heart perceives it, the mind names it. The second is relational. What's happening between us that nobody has said? there's a lot of pressure here right now. When it's named, the room can breathe again. The third is systemic. What's the inherited structure that's shaping everything we're doing without anyone having chosen it? This is what the clinician named in that room full of agencies. Not fault, an inheritance, a design that was never questioned because it was never seen. And in naming it accurately, in making the invisible visible, she created the conditions for something different to be built. At every level, the mechanism is the same. Accurate language activates the prefrontal cortex. The threat response that has been holding the room in its grip begins to discharge. Cortisol drops. Naming is relief because at the level of the body, it is relief. The unnamed thing loses its grip on the room the moment it's named. And when you name moral injury instead of personal failure, something more important happens. The burden returns to where it belongs, not to you, to the system. Here's what happens when these 6 movements become available. The mind returns to discernment, the heart returns to connection, and the body becomes the instrument through which both move into the room. Expression becomes responsive rather than reactive. Responsive expression means you're grounded, you're present, you can meet what's happening without being overtaken by it. Reactive expression means the system has entered your body, the mind is running on survival, the heart is obscured. You're defending, controlling, or shutting down, falling back on the clinical reflexes that survival mode reaches for first. The map does not guarantee you will always be responsive, but it gives you a way to recognize the difference and find your way back. Every movement on this map is something you already know how to do. What's new is the perception. The depth was always there. Now you have a way to find it. When you can see the relational field you're in, you can navigate it, and you are already in it. In every interaction, in every clinical exchange, right now. This work is for the exhausted and the over-resilient. It's for health workers who care deeply but are tired of carrying the system alone. You're not failing the work. It's the system that's failing you. The stories in this video come from the WHO Changemakers film, health workers who refuse to accept that things could not be different. If you want to begin practicing with the map, the Islands of Coherence Starter Pack is the next step. The map is the vision, the starter pack is the coordinates. An ebook with the full scaffolding, a 7-day reflection journal, which takes you through each movement, and a daily centering practice that builds the foundation. You'll find it here. In the next video, we go further into what becomes possible when you're not the only person in the room working from the map. Learning is a relational practice, and coherence, when it's shared, changes what a team can hold. That physician on an ordinary day didn't need a holiday, didn't need resilience training. She needed a map. Now here is yours.